I hope that you are able to enjoy the day as much as I have already and will continue to do so. Thank you. I guess I should start by telling you a little bit about myself. Maybe I should start by saying that I think it's amazing to be able to be here and to speak with you. And so thank you to the organizers for the event to make this possible. The venue's beautiful, and I think we're going to have a great day today. So my name is DB Hurley, and I have been working with open source communities for a long time. I talk at a lot of events around the world, and I travel a good bit for them. But one thing that I don't like to do is just stand up in front of people and speak, because I prefer to have conversations instead. So if I ask questions, feel free to answer them. If I speak too fast, feel free to let me know to slow down, because even in the United States, I am told that I speak very quickly at times, and it makes it hard for people to understand me. But I get excited. I get very excited about what I'm talking about, and I want to share all this information with you, and there's never enough time to do so. So I end up talking very quickly. If it's too quick, please let me know. Raise your hand, yell at me. It's okay. I won't take offense. Because I do recognize there's a difference between American culture and European culture. In America, everything is awesome and amazing and great, and it's the biggest and best you've ever seen. And in European culture, it's like, that's okay. So I will emote with lots of enthusiasm. I'll be very excited. And if you smile at me, I'll think I'm doing a great job. To begin with, I'd like to start with a story. Perhaps we can click through the slides differently. A story about the idea of a printer that jammed. How many of you know where open source began? How many of you are familiar with the story behind the beginnings of open source? Okay, a few, not very many. That's good. That means this should be a good story for you. Maybe before I begin, I'll ask another question. How many of you are marketers? How many of you are developers? Okay, marketers are in the audience today, so this will be an entirely new part of the topic for you. How many of you are familiar with open source? Awesome. How many of you use open source? See, look at all the exercise you guys are getting. The hands are going up. This is great. So open source came about in a rather interesting way. There was a gentleman named Richard Stallman, and he was working in a company, a lab at MIT in the United States. And they all had to share one printer. So the entire office had to share a printer. A printer, that's the thing that they used to use in the old days to actually put information out, and you hold it in your hand. It wasn't digital, it was completely printed, vastly different from today's technology. Yes, it was new for me too. I had to figure out what a printer was. They shared one printer, and as apparently this old technology would jam all the time, and so the paper would get stuck. And what they did was they actually came up with a solution where they hacked the code for the printer driver so that every time it would jam, it would send a notification out to everyone in the print queue that said, "Hello, the printer has jammed. Someone please fix it." And so then everyone that was waiting to print would know that the printer was jammed, and as a result of that, they would fix the printer quickly. And so that gave the first example of hacking code to do something different than what it was meant to do. But then a couple years later, a new printer came out with new drivers. And Richard Stallman said, "I would like it if you would share the code so that I can make the hack again so that we can continue to be notified if the printer jams." And the company that supplied the printer and the driver said, "No, you can't have access to the code because that's our proprietary code." And obviously, that's quite upsetting. And so he said, I'm going to change that. And that was the start of when he said we should create not just a printer driver, but an operating system, something that is completely open source so that anyone can have access to the code to be able to change it, improve it, and make it do something different than what it was intended to do. And that's kind of where open source got its start. I think it's a fascinating story. Linus Torvalds, how many of you are familiar with the name Linus Torvalds? Okay, great. He's a founder of an open source software called Linux, which runs pretty much most everything on the internet, from servers and things like that. And he says, when it comes to software, I much prefer free software because I have very seldom seen a program that has worked well enough for my needs, and having sources available can be a lifesaver. So that's something that resonates personally with me as well, because I'm a bit of an engineer. I know you wouldn't imagine it because I'm standing up and speaking in front of you, and most engineers prefer to be in the back writing code in a dark closet somewhere. Trust me, I like to do that as well. So this is very different for me to stand in front of people instead of sit in the back. But as an engineer, I've often found that software can only take me so far. There's often times that I want to do something that the software doesn't naturally let me do. And the first solution that I like to come to is, well, I could hack that and make it better. I could change that a little bit, but I can't unless it's open source. And so I think as we begin to explore more about open source, I'll tell you more about my interactions with open source in a little bit, but 1999 was a big year for open source because at this time there's about 150 million users on the internet. Red Hat, anyone familiar with the company Red Hat? Okay. They're a Linux-based type of company, the first major open source company. They went public. And then as a result of that, in the same year, there's about 5 or 6 other companies that also went public as well. This was a big year for open source to be able to begin to be more mainstream. And lastly, IBM invested about $1 billion in further development of Linux, proving that this was a stable enough platform that people could trust it. And it was a big deal for open source. But then we've got to be talking a bit about marketing, because that's what's more interesting to you, right? More interesting is the marketing, and marketing automation specifically, because this is an automation day. So let's talk about automation days. I like automation because it makes my life easier. And as an engineer, I like to say that I'm a lazy engineer. Anything that I can do so that I don't have to do it again, that's always the right solution. Marketing automation came about. It's been around for quite a while, actually. One of the first companies is a company called Unica. Unica has a very interesting story. I like to tell stories, so I apologize. I'll tell another story. How many of you are familiar with a company called Unica? How many of you know the story behind one of the founders of Unica? It involves MIT again, and blackjack, and Vegas. Does anyone know about the movie, what was the name of it? 21. Has anyone seen the movie 21? But the MIT college students that would fly to Vegas on the weekends, and they would rig the blackjack, or they would figure out how to beat the table and make a lot of money and then fly back to MIT and go to school and then do that again the next week. Interestingly enough, based on a semi-true story, one of the founders of Unica was doing this at MIT at the same time as he was starting this company in marketing. He realized that there was a lot of power with computing, and he realized that marketing seemed to be one area where a lot of data could be collected, but then they had to figure out what to do with it and how to analyze it to better improve an experience. And so they founded Unica in 1992. It went on, and IBM got involved with it later on, which is interesting because IBM was one of the ones that invested, remember, in Linux. So IBM continues to come up. In 1999, Eloqua, Silverpop also began to appear in marketing automation. And then right after that, in the early 2000s, we saw a huge explosion. And there were tons and tons of companies. I listed some of them here that were in the 2006 to 2008 range that came out with marketing automation tools. In fact, a gentleman by the name of Scott Brinker runs a MarTech type of stats thing. He calls it the MarTech 5000. And it used to be the MarTech 100, then 500, and he did it each year, basically keeping track of all the companies that were in the MarTech space. Last year, he released the MarTech 5000, except that it wasn't 5,000, it was 6,829. But he liked the sound of MarTech 5000, so he used that instead. But this is the total number of MarTech SaaS in 2018. That's a huge, huge market space. There's a lot of companies working in marketing automation and MarTech. And they're all doing different things. Now there's a lot of crossover and there's a lot of similarity. Most of them are SaaS-based companies that are providing some sort of marketing automation solution. So we've talked a little about the history of open source, talked about a little bit of the history of marketing automation. Let me give you my history. Not that it's probably super interesting to you, but I'll try to make it interesting to you. My background begins with open source and marketing, strangely enough, because I was working with a variety of CMS platforms, content management systems, primarily Joomla. How many of you are familiar with Joomla? Awesome. So that's really great to hear because it means that the stuff I was doing was actually relevant back then as well. I worked on the development team for Joomla, and then I was also serving as a community manager for a while. So that involved a lot of travel and doing a lot of speaking. I was also working with Drupal and WordPress and Magento from an e-commerce perspective. And I was using those different tools, the different open source platforms to create websites, to create projects for different customers. And so I was running an agency. I was actually building things using these tools, and like I told you, as an engineer, hacking them to do different things. And we had a wide variety of clients, and we began to grow the agency quite significantly. But what we ran into was that some of our customers wanted to do things in marketing because they had a great website. We had built it for them. And they wanted to do something more. They wanted to make it an interesting, marketable experience. And yet, at the time, this is 2008, 2009, things around that time, the only things that were available were the closed source platforms that I mentioned on the previous slides. There was nothing that they could use that fit the open source model of everything else that they had currently in their website. And one of our clients was, interestingly enough, working with IBM. And he said, you know, they have this system over here, and I think he mentioned Unica, and he also mentioned Silverpop because IBM acquired Silverpop. He said, but they're closed source systems. Wouldn't it be an interesting space if there was something that was open source? Now, I'm not incredibly bright, because I'm busy, right? I'm trying to build a company here. I don't have time to think about whatever he's suggesting to me that I should go do something else instead. I'm busy trying to build a company just so that I can make enough money to be able to provide for my family and all the people that are working with me. And so I said, yeah, that's a great idea, thanks, And I put it to the side and kept working for a couple of years longer. But it was in the back of my mind that there was an opportunity there. There was something that hadn't been created yet. There was a need that hadn't been met. And as we had more and more customers coming to us, clients that were working with us, we saw continued problems that they wanted to do more with marketing and there was nothing available. There was a frustration that was growing. And as I worked with them and as we implemented closed source after closed source solution, I began to realize there was an opportunity there. There was something that wasn't created that needed to be created, and there was a world of people that would value it and that would be able to use it, that could then do something more with it themselves. And so I took the idea and worked on the side on the weekends for a long time and created Mautic, an open source marketing automation platform. And so this was the first time in a landscape of 6,000 plus marketing automation tools, now there was one open source. And so we had one that was now available that you could do anything you wanted to with it. You could hack the code and you could make it work the way you wanted to make it work. You could use it to build a business. You could use it to expand what you were capable of doing. Not just me, not just for a single client or a single customer, but around the world, anyone could take this and could grow it. And that began a really interesting time, because what we saw was this huge growth in the community, because again, there was a lot of frustration. There wasn't anything available and people wanted something more. And with Mautic, we began to grow a community of users that were interested in open source, that were interested in being able to do more with their marketing. And Mautic was a tool that allowed them to do that. So now we have thousands, tens of thousands of Mautic instances around the world. In fact, I think we are just crossed over the 250,000 instances mark. So we have 250,000 Mautic instances running, and more so every single day. And that's really exciting. What's exciting to me is whenever I get to come to an event like this and I get to talk with people, I get to hear stories of how they're able to take this free software and they're able to make money with it. And I know that sounds crazy, but I cannot tell you how excited it makes me to think that something that I've created and been able to work with amazing people around the world to make better and better over the years is able to make you money. I love that idea. I love the idea that you can take something that's free and you can make money with it. That just makes me really excited. So if you have stories of how you're using open source software to make yourself rich, tell me about it. I want to hear about it. What we've done is, through the years, we had to begin by creating software that people expected. Marketing automation looked a certain way. There were certain functionalities that existed in marketing automation that they just expected would be there. That would be email, that would be campaigns and landing pages, things like that. And so we worked really hard in the beginning with Mautic to make sure that we were creating a platform that had all the same features as everyone else. But what we saw as we went along was that with a global community like what we had, now at this point we have 40 some odd Mautic camps, Mautic meetups around the globe that happen every month. We have hundreds of contributors, thousands of contributors if you look beyond just code. We had the opportunity to create something that these closed source companies can't create, and at a scale that they can't function at, which is the power of open source. Together, we can create something bigger than a single company could ever create. And so as we began to continue developing on the platform, what we saw was we had this tremendous opportunity to not only just create the same thing as everyone else but make it open source, but now we have the opportunity to lead the way, to be the thought leader in the space for marketing automation, to be able to say, not only this is what marketing automation is today, but this is what it's going to look like tomorrow. And so one of the things that I have been talking a lot about here lately is the future of MarTech. And I write about it on my blog and I talk about it at conferences, looking at not what marketing automation is right now, but what it's going to look like tomorrow. And I believe that there are several core principles of marketing automation that will become more and more relevant in the future. And the beauty of Mautic and the open source community is that we have a unique advantage to be able to create this environment. We have the opportunity to do what other closed source companies cannot do, and software that they cannot provide. So there's a bunch of technical terms up here, and I apologize for the marketers in the room. But I think I can make it in a way that makes it interesting and something that will make sense to you as we talk about them. Headless marketing automation. That sounds crazy, right? But it's the idea that instead of one single platform that all of it has to live within, you have one login, then you go to one screen and it has everything that has it built into it. The idea of headless marketing automation says you take the thing that you're looking at, the front end, and you separate it out from the database, the back end, and you can use either one without the other. What that means then is that you have the opportunity to be able to put your own database wherever it lives, and you're able to use that database with the Mautic look, the front end. Does that make sense? Are you with me? A little bit? Yeah? You've got to talk to me. Otherwise, I'm going to feel like no one's here but me, and that's just awkward. Serverless. How many of you are familiar with the term like serverless? All right, there's a couple. All right, so it's not truly serverless, is it, right? Because we all know that the code and the software has to run somewhere. It's running on a server somewhere. The beauty of serverless is that you don't have to worry about that server. Somebody else is doing that for you. With Mautic 3, this next major version where we're taking on some of these challenges, we believe we're going to be able to create the software in a way that makes it serverless, meaning that you don't have to worry about setting up a specific server. You can run it on a Lambda type of function, a serverless environment. Basically, it means it takes away the headaches of having to set up a server and configure it a certain way. You can run it as a service. Microservices are one of the biggest features of Mautic 3 that I believe gives us a very unique advantage. Because with the idea of taking something and making it headless, where we have the front end that does one thing, we have the database and the back end that does something different, microservices gives us the opportunity to take that back end of all those unique functions and be able to break them up and use just bits and pieces of them. And I can give you some examples of them if you're curious. Does anyone want a better understanding of microservices? All right. So if we think about marketing automation, what's the first thing that comes to mind for you? Go ahead, you can answer me. Okay, I'll give you this one. But if I ask another question, I expect you to answer it. Email marketing, possibly. Campaign building. Landing pages. What's that? Spam, unfortunately. So, you know why? Because a lot of people still have the misconceived notion that marketing automation is equivalent to email marketing. And that's where Mautic actually has a good, unique advantage. And that's one area where microservices comes into play, is the idea of a multi-channel marketing experience. It's not just email anymore, right? We know better. We know that a true marketing automation experience involves landing pages and SMS and maybe web push notifications or mobile notifications, all these different channels. And it's not just blindly sending things out. It's using the information from what you know about the marketer or what you know about the customer, the visitor to the site, to change how you market to them, right? But if you look at microservices, what you have is the opportunity to say, you know what, we don't have to do just this full thing. You don't have to use all of it. Perhaps you only want to send SMS notifications. And so you have another system that's handling your landing pages. You've got a CMS system that's handling your website. Maybe you have another email provider that you're using to send emails, but you need to send SMS notifications. With a microservice, you can tie in the functionality of Mautic to your existing site purely for one single thing. You don't have to take all of it as one package. You can use just SMS push notifications. Or, how many of you are familiar with Marketo? I'm going to get myself in a little bit of trouble here because we're recording this. One of the things that I was at a conference a couple months ago, and they were talking about the benefits and the negatives of Marketo. And they do a lot of things right. There's no doubt about it. But there are some things that in the session I was attending, they were telling them how to programmatically write a bunch of script code in order to get the email to look pretty that would go to the rep on the company side, not to the customer, but to the company. And they went through this really long and drawn out process telling a room full of marketers how to write code to get a pretty looking output for the sales rep. And as I sat there, I thought, that's a perfect example of a microservice. You could be using Marketo, but rather than having to write all this code directly within Marketo to accomplish a pretty looking format for the email that goes to the sales rep, you could actually tie in a microservice through the API and have it actually send the data to Mautic, your Mautic instance as a microservice, to format and beautify that text and then send it on to the rep. So you don't have to use an entire Mautic instance. You could still be using Marketo, but what you can do is you can actually use a microservice to do one particular task. Just clean up that email and then send it on. With microservices in Mautic 3, that's the type of thing we want to accomplish. What it does, and maybe I hope you'll begin to see my thinking on this, is when you have a landscape of almost 7,000 MarTech softwares, if you're a marketer and you're working with a company, you more than likely are using 1 or 2 of them, or 30 of them, depending on the instance. And you're always having to figure out how to make them talk to each other, and how to make the data over here work with the data over here, and bringing it all together. With Mautic 3, our goal is to take that disparate, that widespread landscape of 7,000 different organizations, different data sets, and bring them all together for you, so that you can use the best of each of them, and you can use Mautic and a microservice as kind of the glue that holds it all together. Does that make sense? That's a great question. So I'll repeat questions, and thank you. That's exactly what I'd like to see more of you do. If you have questions, feel free to ask them. The question was, does that mean that I don't see a consolidation in the MarTech market space? And I was originally thinking there would be. I would say no now. And the reason I'll say I don't believe there's going to be consolidation in the market is because, and actually Scott Brinker, the gentleman that has done the data research on the subject, he believes the same thing, actually, which made me feel like, hey, somebody else thinks what I think. The reason why is because every time there's a consolidation in the space, because there are companies that merge and bigger companies that acquire smaller ones in the MarTech space, 10 more pop up. Every year that he's done the MarTech landscape, it's grown significantly. And yes, there are mergers that occur, but the number of mergers that occur compared to the number of new companies that start, there's no comparison. It continues to explode. And so what we're beginning to see is that even though there is consolidation, maybe in particular sectors, overall, the number of companies in the space continues to grow, because there's niche marketing, and so maybe they're only going to do one little particular thing. And so it continues to expand and grow rather than shrinking down to just a couple. Fantastic question. As a result of that, because I don't believe that we're going to see that market continue to shrink, but like the stats have proved for the last 8 years, continue to grow, something like Mautic 3 that is able to be the glue between all of these different platforms is the perfect and best solution. And open source is really and truly the only way you're able to accomplish that. 5 minutes. Okay. Well, okay, so I'll just rush really quickly because you guys clearly do not care about the technical behind it. But if you did, we're using the same stack, Symfony, that we are using in the current version of Mautic. So from a source code perspective, we're able to take all the benefits that we have in existing Mautic and be able to use those in Mautic 3. So there won't be a huge shift. We won't lose all that ground that we've been so successful in so far. And then we're implementing new JavaScript stuff on the front end that makes it incredibly lightning fast and run on a CDN network separate. Because again, if it's headless, you can have the front end on one spot and the back end on somewhere different. But I only have a couple minutes left, and I'd really rather hear your questions and talk to you than me just ramble on more. Are there specific questions that you guys have?
Si vous voulez les poser en français, si vous n'êtes pas à l'aise, on fera la traduction et vous aurez du temps aussi au déjeuner à discuter avec lui, etc. Donc n'hésitez pas à poser vos questions.
Yes. Yeah. So to tell you more about Mautic 3, everybody wants to know when it's coming. I respect you asking. I won't be able to tell you the answer. The reason why I cannot give you the answer is because Mautic 3 depends on the community to develop it. And so my job, one of my roles, is to encourage everyone towards the same goal. We understand we know what Mautic 3 is, now we just have to work towards that goal. We have a goal of having some significant progress made in this year, 2018, and 2019 being the year that we release it in. It's going to be dependent on a lot of factors, but the idea would be that we're creating a headless, serverless, microservice-based marketing automation platform. That would be the goal in a nutshell. You'll see a lot of the same functionalities. You can use it as a single platform, exactly like you do today with Mautic 2. So there's not a huge change in that regard, except there's a lot of things that we want to be cleaning up and improving along the way, such as the builder that we're using for landing pages and emails, things like that. Reporting is another one that's been talked about that we're going to make sure is vastly improved in Mautic 3. But yeah, there's a whole list of features. In fact, on my blog and on Mautic.org's blog, I think there's several different write-ups about Mautic 3 and what actually is involved in that process, as well as timelines. So that'd be a good place to check out for that. Other questions?
Vous avez un micro devant vous. Si vous voulez utiliser le micro, vous appuyez sur Speak.
It's a good question. So the question was, how easy would it be for non-technical users to use Mautic 3? Sorry, say that last bit again.
If you take Mautic and say it's symbolic for a sort of a trend that goes on in the MarTech industry, it's more like to have the bigger picture.
I think so how Mautic 3 would fit in the MarTech space, given that there's such overwhelming abundance of other tools that are available, and how easy would Mautic 3 be to use from a non-technical perspective? Our goal is to make Mautic 3 even more user-friendly than Mautic 2. So we're going to enhance the technical capabilities of the platform through the ways that I've mentioned here. But ultimately, what we did with Mautic 2 was try to, well, really with Mautic in general, was try to make a platform that was extremely easy to use. And I think, not to brag because it was a community full of people that did the work, but I think we made a platform that was incredibly easy to get into. The on-ramp for learning how to use marketing automation with Mautic was incredibly fast. We don't want to lose that with Mautic 3. In fact, we want to build on that and make Mautic 3 even easier, whether that means a setup guide, whether that means a step-by-step to get you onboarded, things like that. The goal would be that for the end user, Mautic 3 feels like Mautic 2 but better, while enabling companies to be able to do more with it from a technical perspective. Does that make sense? There's a question over here.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So my question is how Mautic is planning to compete with those global players like HubSpot, Marketo. How you are ultimately they are on the back foot, right? Or is how Mautic is ultimately challenging them?
So the question was, and I'll actually expand on the question a little bit. You tell me if this is incorrect. But with 7,000 plus companies in the MarTech space, and some of the global players that are coming onto the space, like HubSpot, how does Mautic compete with them, and how do we continue to grow? And the beauty of it is we continue to grow because we have abilities far beyond a single company. When you look at the Mautic community, we have far more accounts, far more instances that are being run than any other marketing automation platform out there. And we have way more developers. If you look at a single company, even on some of the mid to larger size companies, they might have 1,000, maybe, developers. We can have 10,000 in open source, all working on this shared vision of something that's bigger. So our goal is to make sure, my goal is to make sure that we all have a very clear and shared understanding of what we want to create and accomplish. And then as long as we're all moving in that same direction, we have vast potential and opportunity beyond these other players. So part of the thing that keeps me awake at night is identifying not just what we do today, because again, like I said, I believe Mautic has the opportunity to be a thought leader, to be a leader in the MarTech space in general. To do that, we have to be able to see not just what's working today, but what's going to be working tomorrow. And a Mautic open source community is more capable of shifting and moving at a speed that a larger company cannot move at. Things like microservices, things like a headless architecture, these other players either cannot do or will take a very long time to implement. So being an open source community, we have the ability to our advantage to use speed and a vast technical resource of a global community to improve the product and even begin to set paces beyond what others can create. I hope that answers your question. I'm probably out of time because I think I'm getting walked off the stage.
If it's short, Walid.
What's that?
Last question, very quick.
Yes. That is a great question. The question was, how does GDPR affect, or how do I see it affecting Mautic and marketing automation in general? Thankfully, there are experts here today that are talking on this exact topic in multiple sessions later on. So how is that for a plug?
Perfect answer.
But I'll give you my 2 cents really quickly. First of all, I think it's fantastic. I think it puts more of the power back in the hands of the customer, the consumer, about their data. And if you have interests about my thoughts on that, come talk to me later. I have some very, very specific ideas on ways I think data ownership is crucial and critical in the future. But we don't have time to discuss that right now. GDPR as a whole, I believe the philosophy and the mentality behind it is absolutely the right direction. And Mautic has already the capability to be fully GDPR compliant in and of itself. What I'd like to see with Mautic 3 is implementing some strategic configuration options to make it even easier in the European market to be able to enable that functionality by a simple couple of clicks. Things like opting in, things like the cookies, everything that goes along with the GDPR. The right for data removal, things like that. I think it's a good thing overall for marketing automation. So I talked a little bit about for the consumer, for Mautic. For marketing automation as a whole, I think it's really good because the idea is that it's going to hopefully eliminate some of the unnecessary communication, hopefully restore some of the balance of power, quote unquote, in regards to data. And overall, I believe we'll see it clean up the marketing automation aspect a little bit and make marketers more attentive to what they're doing. So we're eliminating just the vast, mindless automation that kind of just overwhelms people and instead makes a more practical and worthwhile and ultimately a better customer experience. So that's my 2 cents on it.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. Thank you again.